Welcome to Rock the Recovery podcast edition. I've got Dr. Erson Religioso, or better known as Dr. E, with me. Welcome, Dr. E.
How's it going today?
Uh, Not too bad. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Western New York. Um, so, what I'd like to chat with you about is your amazing journey that you've been on since you became a physical therapist. Now, it's been what, over about 25 years, I believe, since you
26
first.
years, yeah.
26 years, wow. And it's been quite a journey. So I don't know if you recall this, but we actually met very briefly while I was at school. You came to do a guest lecture for one of my ortho classes. So I met you at that point, and I just remember being completely blown away by you, almost like, it's like, that day you meet like, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You know what I mean? Like you're
You're
it's
too
like
kind, actually. That's too
no,
kind.
no, I'm serious. Like
You're actually the second person to say that, actually. Another physical therapist came to see me, a Damon professor, and his initial thing was like he just walked in my office and said, "Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope."
I don't know. So I guess, at this point you've probably turned into Yoda, I imagine, because it's been another, 15 years of experience and everything. So, it's no, but I just remember being very impressed by you, and at the time, my plan was to go into ortho. I was going to be an ortho outpatient physical therapist. Um, it was, it was that or the highway. I had no other intention of doing anything else. So, you know, watching you speak, your knowledge base, and everything was just amazing. And so, I'm sitting there even at that point in schooling thinking, wow, this is who I want to be in 10 years, in 5, 10 years. So it was funny because about, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago, we connected on social media. And it was funny because I was watching your content and I'm going, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. And it wasn't for like probably 3 or 4 days of watching
Oh,
your
you
videos
didn't
and
you didn't
whatever.
rec you didn't recognize that I was the same guy?
No, I'm like, oh, okay. This is Urs. I'm like, because it's not a very common name. I'm like, this is him.
Maybe
This
I
is
maybe I
this.
aged poorly.
No, in fact, not quite the opposite. It's like wow, I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly the same guy. And, Dr. E. Erson, it's not a name you forget very quickly. So I'm like, oh my God, this guy's still at it and kicking butt and he's turned into Yoda. So, the reason I wanted to touch base with you today is because I'm sure there's a lot of students, new graduates, people who are just getting their careers started. I'm 15 years in. I actually ended up taking a right turn and going you know, into sniff. I work at a sniff now, but there's a lot of people who want the path that you've taken. You've been extraordinarily successful. You have a lot going on, and we're going to hear all about it today. But I thought it'd be great so that they could all hear, your journey, how you got here, what you found to be important on your path, what you maybe would have lived without. But, you know, um, so start at the beginning. Tell me how you became a Jedi Knight.
So, uh, my parents are medical doctors, and I've always had that kind of background. As a kid, I remember thinking I loved going to the dentist. I didn't mind going to other doctors other than my mom, because my mom, to the best of my knowledge, just like gave me shots and stuff at home. Like, I never had to go see
Right,
her in her own office.
right.
But I remember other kids saying like, "Oh, I hate going to the doctor. I hate going to the dentist." And I'm like, "Why?" For me, it was just like, well, not only see my parents, but even the dentist. I got toys at the dentist. My dentist always had the like cool little gadgets that he would give you for being a good patient. So
Mhm.
I always had that medical background, and I always enjoyed helping people. So um, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I went to college, and I went to college following a friend. I just thought like I was really into my friends at the time, and following a friend, I just thought, hey, this is like a medical school type, well, Duval College, in Buffalo, New York. It has a
Mhm.
PT program. Um, she was in physical therapy at that point. She was in a car accident in our senior year, and I thought, hey,
Mhm.
this seems pretty cool, and I'll just enter into this program. I got accepted, and I said, if I don't like it, I'll just continue on to med school and be an MD.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, I didn't, yeah, why not? I didn't
Right.
even know if I liked it or not.
Hmm.
Until the first day of my first clinical, I remember it was a acute care, and I was just doing the standard acute care stuff, like just
Yeah.
ranging and gate gate stuff and things that like PT typically like me don't consider fancy. And
Right.
I remember calling my parents on at the end of that first day. I said, I love this. This is what I want to be.
Oh,
And
very
that
cool.
really sparked my knowledge or my passion for physical therapy. And then my ortho professor, Ron Shank, I don't know if you ever come
Hmm.
across him in your
Yeah.
Western New York travels.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, but he at way back a long time ago, over 20 years ago, he had a really special ortho class because like at a time when maybe only one or two DPT programs, master's programs were prevalent, and there's still a ton of bachelor's programs out there. So a lot
Mhm.
of the bachelor's programs, they only had maybe one 3 credit ortho class, but Ron had the foresight for ortho to have a 5 credit extremities and a 5 credit spine over 2 semesters. And we just had
Right.
so much more ortho training as a result of him being a manual therapy fellow, and also McKenzie trained and residency trained. So that also ignited this passion for manual therapy. And I remember around graduating, I told my parents, or like when I was getting ready, sometime in my fifth year of school, which is our final year at that time with the combined BS and MS, I told my parents, again, who are MDs, I'm like, I think I want to become a chiropractor. Because at the time I thought
Hmm.
spinal manipulation is just the coolest, and I want to become really proficient at it. So
Mhm.
they said, "Hey, we're gonna disown you if you become a chiropractor." Not to say that all chiropractors
Oh
are
no.
bad and all PTs are good, but my parents thinking that like chiropractors are adjusting babies instead of like the straight chiropractors are the kinds that I guess we could all agree that probably not that great for the medical profession. Versus
Sure.
mixers are more like PTs. Straight chiropractors are like again adjusting babies for colic and saying you don't need medication if you need an adjustment. That kind of
Right.
craziness.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
yeah. So
On the peripheries, right.
yeah. So on my final clinical, there's a guy who was heading up the Niagara Falls Memorial Medical. He was like the director of rehab. So he wasn't my CI, but
Fine.
I interacted with him a lot. Dr. Terry Rose. He eventually became my business partner for several years, in fact. But he showed me this. He opened up this PT journal to Stanley Paris's program. There was like a picture of Paris in the corner, and all his like like, oh, this guy can teach you how to manipulate. You don't have to become a chiropractor. And
Sure, right.
he also started a DPT program combined with a residency. So I immediately applied to that, and I literally started the Monday after I graduated. I graduated on a Friday, had a weekend off, and I started Stanley Paris's DPT program.
Oh my God. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that so start off strong is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I got a 2-day break. Well, the rest of my
Right.
friends were like looking for jobs and everything.
Yeah.
Then I asked Ron Shank, can you be my mentor? So I got a job with him for a year. I was doing residency with him while I would travel about once a month down to St. Augustine and learn from Stanley
Mm.
Paris and his faculty, or wherever the
Wow.
course was. Sometimes it was in Washington, D.C. or whatever. I couldn't afford
Mm.
to fly at the time, so I did a lot of driving all over the place.
Wow.
Yeah. Then I love that. I learned how to be a great manual therapist. At
Sure.
the time, there was a lot of other different manual therapy gurus I learned from Mulligan, David
Mhm.
Butler, Institute of Physical Art. Um, I took some Grimsby courses, a couple of other spinal manipulation courses, some soft tissue courses. All in all, I probably took between like 60 and 70 courses, I estimate, between like the first 5 to 7 years of my career. And my goal was to kind of like supplant all these gurus, right? I thought like, oh, well, there could be only one, not like I'm going to be Highlander and cut off everyone's head and gain their powers. But I
Right.
thought, hey, someone has to replace these guys when they get too old to teach or they pass on. So I thought I'm
You-
going to
you-
be that person,
You're
I
starting to
want
sound more like Darth Vader, actually.
I know, yeah, take over the universe. Yeah, I know. I don't want. Hey, even the Empire think that they're good, right? It's like
Right.
how the
Right.
Nazis thought they were good, right? Yeah, everyone's the hero of their own story, even if they're the
But
villain,
they're
right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I
As
got a
long as you
great
win, right?
dose.
No.
Yeah, yeah. I got a great dose of humble pie though, and eventually like I learned that there's no right way or wrong way, and I kind of had all these like conflicting approaches in my head. And that's how I
Right.
came up with modern manual therapy and what I call the eclectic approach. And I try to take what is simple, and that's the key, what is simple and successful from each approach, and kind of take away all the minutia. And I
Hmm.
know that each approach, there's like pluses and minuses, and a lot of them, almost anything can have an equal chance to work in my book, whether it's soft tissue work or, spinal manipulation or McKenzie method or neurodynamics. Everything potentially can work because they all work for the same reasons, meaning that they're all just novel input to the central nervous system, and central nervous system can kind of make a decision: is this dangerous or a red light, or is this safe or a green light? And if it's a green light, it kind of resets pain and movement thresholds temporarily, and that's where active strategies come in. Because again, for the first 10 years of my career, I thought I had like this, gift from God hands, and I was super
Hmm.
coordinated, amazing manipulator, and I'm fixing people, and I had these magic hands. And every time I
Sure.
was told I had magic hands, patients are like, "Oh, feeding into this ego, or my head's getting bigger and bigger and bigger."
Right.
And now if I hear someone say they have magic hands, it's like my biggest pet peeve, you know,
Mhm.
because there's a big anti-manual therapy flack on social media, and for good reason, right? Because people, like I used to be for the first 10 years of my career, I just telling patients I was going to fix them so they become dependent on me, as opposed to
Right.
me giving them some sort of active strategy to get better on their own, and changing their behaviors that got them there in the
Yeah.
first place.
One thing I noticed on your website was you for your practice is that you mentioned that you try to provide as little service to them as possible, almost like you're like you said, you're trying to provide them um the knowledge that they need to do it, you know.
Right. Yeah. And not a little service. In fact, I would say I provide them a great service, but I do as little
No,
manual therapy as possible.
gotcha. Understood. Sorry,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
misspoke.
No, I get all these great reviews for providing one-star service. No, but yeah, the thing is like I'm very big into like behavioral change and almost like programming people. And
Mhm.
I think one of the things that I like to teach is that I don't call it homework, right? Because I mean, you've been a student for a long time, right?
Yep,
How often did you enjoy doing homework? Honestly, did you ever enjoy doing homework?
not especially.
No, right. Like the
Right,
connotation behind homework is, oh, this is something you have to do because it's good for you, right?
right.
And it's like you look forward to it being over. For me as a kid, I was like a overweight little kid who loved playing video games. For me, homework was just something that prevented me from playing video games.
Mm.
So
Or going to
several
the
years ago,
dentist, right?
right? Yes, yeah, and getting a toy, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Uh, I I had a patient several years ago say, Dr. E gave me a recovery plan. Within 2 visits, I was better. And I was like, recovery plan?
Recovery
Hmm.
plan. Wow.
Yeah, so now I call all of the things I give patients, whether it's just like do these, repeated end range loading resets, go for 2 outdoor walks a day, change
Mhm.
positions frequently, get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. So it's more than just like McKenzie press up. So it's more than just like do this 3 times a day. I try to
Right.
kind of factor in all these certain things that could be like avoiding things that sensitize the system and doing a high dosage of things that desensitize the system. Right. So that's just like if you follow this recovery plan step by step, chances are
Mhm.
you're going to get better. I can't promise 100%, but I
Sure.
think you're going to get better.
Well, I love that you call it a recovery plan because it immediately gives me the feeling that it's going to work.
Right. And also that it's not homework, right? It's like it gives you a
Right.
step by step thing. It's kind of laid out for you. And in the entire visit, I already am setting the stage with, look, even if I scrape you with a tool, even if I manipulate you and you get a great crack and you think I put something back into place, and I already tell them they're not really putting things back into place because they were not a place to begin with. Um, but regardless of what I do, there's going to be a temporary window of improvement, right? There's going to be, like,
Right.
in fact, the more rapid the improvement is, the more transient the relief probably will be,
Right.
right?
It's acute improvement, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's up to you to keep that. And again, 15
Right.
years ago, for me, the home program I would tell patients is if you do these exercises, you will keep some of the improvement. And I even thought that the net gain would have to be at each visit. I didn't think that
Hmm.
they could continue to self-treat without me. And that's back when I was seeing
Right,
people 2, 3 times a week, 30, 40 visits, right? Now that
right.
I make it all on the patient and all about like behavioral change, and I just set the stage on my visits to desensitize their system as much as possible to improve their compliance. So their compliance is at a high enough dosage that they can continue to desensitize the system without me, right?
Mm,
Now, and that's why I say that this is now to self-treat. I give them self-treatments and self-assessments. So they really need me as little as possible. And that's how I kind of went from, again, seeing people like 20, 40 times to
right.
4 to 6 times on average, really.
Mhm. With high value at every session.
Right. Yes. High value. High value. Yeah.
This isn't like McDonald's. This is not fast food we're talking about.
No,
So
although some
uh,
people might consider McDonald's fast food. I mean high value
right,
if they really
yeah,
like it,
right.
right? Yeah.
Good point. Good, but it's not good for you.
No, it's
So
absolutely not.
yeah. So so you kind of briefly mentioned that like you said, you hit the ground running. You acquired all this information. Now, were you paying for that kind of out of pocket? Were you taking that, if, as a new grad, I'm coming out of school, you know, I need to expect that I'm going to be investing in my future, or
Yes,
I mean,
I did.
not
Yeah.
especially
I mean,
nowadays, right?
I was fortunate enough again to have parents who are MDs. So I graduated with no loans, but I thought, hey, you know what? If I'm
Mm,
going to continue my education, I'm just going to rack up debt like the American dream, right? Yeah.
right.
So I paid
Second
for
mortgage.
all of, yeah, I paid for all that stuff on my own,
Mm,
um, just with my salary and just I think
sure.
at some point I was working maybe a couple like my residency and another part-time PT job
Mm,
to be able to afford all this travel and everything. Although travel was a lot cheaper 26 years ago. Um,
right.
so yeah, I
And
did
and
all
do it while
that.
you're young,
Yes, absolutely.
right?
So I did all that and I graduated my DPT program. And I remember then I ended up having the good fortune of being able to teach at DUval. I didn't know what to do at the point because I didn't, my residency, they didn't actually have a job opening for me as a full-time PT because of residency, you make less, right? So I didn't want
Mhm.
to keep on having like the 70% salary. And then Ron Shank told me, hey, they have an opening at DUval. So I
Mm,
applied and I started teaching full time at DUval only 1 year after I graduated, which is kind of crazy because I ended up teaching like a lot of people who I hung out with, which was very odd. Like I would hang out in
yeah.
I would be in like the faculty lounge and people were like, "What are you doing in here, kid?" And I'm like, "I'm faculty now." Like I show my badge and
Wow. So you were sitting at a table with people who were just your professor a year before,
a year
or
before.
wow.
It was strange. And at the time, I just felt like so out of place that, during faculty meetings, everything, they're all talking about their kids. And here I am, like just some single dude still going out to bars and
Right,
drinking beers and everything.
right. Traveling to St. Augustine over the weekend,
Right,
right.
right, yeah, and then coming right
Wow.
back and getting right
Jeez.
into the thick of it. So I did that
Yeah.
for a year, and my exit interview was, hey, you know what? This was a temporary job. We had a faculty on sabbatical, but this is on a
Right.
full-time thing, and I was like, what? Like I just thought that was hired here, but it was only a year. They didn't tell me that when I started.
Oh, wow.
So then my other ortho professor, Dr. Eric Miller, he said, "Hey, the company I work for, Western New York Physical Therapy, they have an opening for a PT." And I didn't know it was a clinic director. I have no experience other than being a PT. I apply for this job, I get it, clinic director. So here I am then now managing a clinic with just me and a PTA and a secretary. It was part-time, and they're like, "Okay, you make it full-time. Go." That was it. Like it was
Wow.
barely a part-time clinic. Um, but with the level of service I provided, even seeing people many, many more times than I back then than I do now,
Sure.
within like 3 or 4 years, we were one of the only clinics in the company that was consistently in the black. Um,
Mm,
we had the lowest cancellation rate. We thought I eventually hired another full-time PT.
right.
So we had two PTs, a PTA, secretary, occasionally had a clinic dog. I did that for 5 or 6 years. But on day
Wow.
one of that interview for that company, they said, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I said, "Owning my own clinic." Like I just said that this is not, I knew this wasn't going to be my own, like,
Right.
I wasn't going to work for someone forever. I ended up doing that for about 5 or 6 years. My wife, eventually I married a PT. She was PT student at the time. Then she graduated as
Mm,
PT. Then she practiced for a little bit, but then we started having all these kids because I have 6 kids now. So around our
mm,
third kid, um, she
My
had
blood
only
pressure
worked
just
for,
went up.
yeah, she only went, she had only worked for a home care company for 363 days.
Oh,
So before she had to go on maternity leave, and they said, "Hey, you
uh-huh.
know what? We can't give you like the full 3 months. We can only give you 6 weeks because if you had worked two
Right.
days longer," and of course we understood that they can't make exceptions. It just sounds like a terrible
Sure.
thing. And at the time, I had just given my 2 weeks to the other company, and I
Oh, okay.
started my own practice. And she
Oh
said
my
to me
goodness.
like, "Well, and we had just bought our dream house that was dependent on two salaries
Right.
for the mortgage." And she's like, I'm not going back to work, right? And I'm like, well, I'm like basically leasing the cheapest car that I could find. I'm barely turning a profit. I'm like, "Look, I just started a practice, so
Right.
let's give this 6 months, and if not, we'll move in with my parents if it fails."
Hmm. Wow.
So yeah, I had this
That's
practice
nerve-wracking.
within a, it was. So there's nothing that drives you to work more than risk, and risk for your family and
Right.
risk for your wife
Family.
and your 3 children, right? Um,
Amen.
yeah, so I started that practice, and it was 5 minutes away from my old practice, and literally only like 10% of my patients came with me. I only took a month off for paternity leave, and I just
Mhm.
assumed that like my patients would find me. And eventually former patients did find me in Williamsville because it
Right.
wasn't too far away, but I had thought that like the majority of my patients were like people who I'd seen for years, over a decade. I thought that they would just come to the clinic. Some of them
Sure.
stayed at the old clinic. Inexplicably, they were like, "Well, my script says the old clinic." Okay, I'm like, "Okay, so I
Oh
left,
man.
my secretary left, my
Uh,
other PT left, and my PTA left." Like, I remember like I
oh
was talking
wow.
to a colleague about it. They're like, "What are these patients loyal to the building? Like, is the building been giving them great service?" Because literally my entire staff
Right.
left eventually when I left. And I had still had patients who were like,
Still
"What do you think I
going.
should do?" Yeah, I know they're still going there. Um, so I built up another whole practice. I eventually, it was a great hybrid model. I got paid per patient. That was like my rent. Like the portion that they took off of the reimbursement was my rent. So I only got paid per patient. Otherwise, I had no expenses. Um, I didn't have like a traditional leasing agreement or anything, but I also got paid per patient. So if I took two students, I got paid for their patients too, and it ended up working really well.
Were you in like a gym or something? Where
I
were
was
you
no,
renting
I
space?
was just like in my friend's clinic. The guy who told me,
Oh,
Dr.
gotcha.
Terry Rose, the guy who told
Mm.
me
Oh, right.
about Stanley Paris, he opened up a Rose Physical Therapy. He's like, "Well, I just started this. I can't afford you to pay you thing." He's like, "I'll pay you per patient. You bring patients, I'll pay you per patient." So we had our own, like, I even had my own business cards. People that didn't quite understand, like, they thought I worked for
Mm.
him. My patients didn't know why my name wasn't on the door, but I mean, everyone was happy. So I did that
Sure.
for a couple years. And then around the time when my fourth kid was born, I just started like blogging. I developed the Edge mobility tool, and I started
Mm.
blogging because I wanted to promote that as much as possible. And I thought, this is like a product that it's not like tissues. It's not like something that you keep on buying over and over and over again, right? You buy like one hammer from
Yeah.
hammer.com, it lasts forever. You have very little reason to go back to hammer.com. So I started talking about case studies and the way I use this and the way I use like the different kind of like amalgamation of like things before I had the eclectic approach and it was more of a system. And
Mm.
my whole goal was just to drive traffic back to my blog so people would buy products. But then eventually
Mm.
started getting like teaching gigs, and people started buying more of my products, and I started getting recognized by the very few amount of PTs that were in social media at the time. I
Right.
asked them initially, "Hey, can you share my stuff?" I asked like, "Hey, Mike Reinold, can you share my stuff?" He's like, "No, I don't know you, brother." Like, I had to earn it, right? I had to earn
Right.
and be vetted by these people. So I just thought I'm gonna just create so much content that people are going to share it. And eventually, like, they recognize me and they started sharing their stuff. And that's I started getting teaching gigs, like, first all over the world. And now, I teach online. I have these courses that are approved in like most states. And
Mm.
um I have a podcast, and I just try to like just remain prolific. I still love PT. I have a cash-based practice now. I eventually left Rose PT. I have a clinic in a well, it used to be a gym, and now it's just the gym closed, so now it's just me and a massage therapist in
Okay.
a country club. Hopefully, they're going to open up a gym again. I have minimal exercise equipment, but I still
Mm.
teach, several courses a year. I have my courses online, and I just try to interact with other big names in the industry and just try to be a passionate and like an inspiration. My goal really is to help 10,000 patients a week, not 10 patients a week. Because
Right.
someone once asked me that a long time ago when I was starting out, right? Like, how do you help the next 10,000? Do you want to help 10 or 10,000? So if I can level up PTs and teach them like simple ways to get the majority of people better, regardless of whether it's sniff. I even asked you this too, right? Like every patient's an ortho patient, every patient's a neuro patient. You can
Right.
use like there's no unskilled physical therapy. You can make you as the individual clinician make it unskilled if all you're doing is the same things, prescribing the same exercise. I mean, I've seen a ton of unskilled ortho, you know.
Yes. You can see it anywhere. You can
You can
definitely
see it
see it.
anywhere,
Right.
for sure.
You're absolutely right. Well,
So
that's
that's my
very cool.
journey
So,
in a nutshell.
wow. And that's great. So, just because you touched on a lot in a very little period of time. So you have Edge Mobility System, which is where you sell products. You
Hmm.
have a podcast, Untold Physio Stories.
Yeah, and I'll get you on there to talk about, how you because every there's so many like people who end up like, oh, I'm gonna do ortho, I'm gonna do all sports, treat all athletes, right? And then they end up somewhere else, and I want to hear that. So we'll swap podcasts sometime.
Oh, absolutely. And then you have your seminars.
Yeah, modern manual therapy, the eclectic approach, and I have other like self other I have a couple other gurus who teach for me. Like there's a nutrition one, there's a BFR one, there's a patient education one. And sometime later this year, I'm gonna probably launch a new course on breath work and recovery. So
Oh, very cool. Very good. Well, so let's leave these new students, these new grads with one last thing. So, you know, if to get your career going on the right foot, because, like I said, I was also, kind of in the same boat as you. I was all ortho. I knew that's what I wanted to do. Jumped into a clinic, and my career just kind of never, you know, I wasn't in a place to fund, the continuing education. I and you just you look for that, that person who's going to take you under their wing, you know, and sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. So, you definitely found yourself in the right place at the right time, it seems. But I mean,
yeah, I was
so
very fortunate to have a lot of different mentors, and that's the thing. Like
right,
I think what you're getting at, Rob, not to interrupt you, is that you
yeah,
need to
go ahead.
have a mentor, and there's plenty of like there's paid mentors out there. There's plenty of free mentors out there too. You can just even learn from them on social media. Um,
Mhm.
but definitely, you need to have a mentor, whether it's a clinical mentor, a business mentor. Um, there are people out there who have similar journeys who can help you because somehow I launched like a couple businesses on my own with no business mentoring, and I don't even know how I did that
So-
because I look
Right,
back at all these things that I wish I would have done earlier, and
earlier.
you
See,
learn from your mistakes.
you're a professor after 1 year, clinic director, and then started your own, business within a business.
Online
That's
business. Yeah, right. Yeah.
online
Then I
business.
launched like one of the first PT influencers before social media influencer was a term.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. Yeah, so you've done it a little of everything, and you've done it,
Yeah.
really big, and that's very impressive. And I
I did
and
I
I
did forget to mention too that I was also a clinical peer reviewer for an insurance company.
oh,
As I launched my practice, I taught at I taught at Duville, Damon, and UB.
right,
Had my practice, and then I also was a clinical peer reviewer because I was just trying to make ends meet. I don't want to
right,
I don't want to make like all of a sudden I built this clinic and patients just flooded the doors. Like I was working
right.
like 70 hours a week.
That's what I was about to ask you. Right.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a grind, like if you want to make it work, if you're passionate about it, but your job isn't working for you, that's more your fault than anything. Like there are good jobs out there, and I want to stress that there are good jobs, there are good employers. Not it Entrepreneurialism is not for everyone. I can tell you that
Mhm.
for sure. Some people are going to be the best employees in the world, but if you're not a good employee, then you're probably not going to be a great boss either. So,
Words of experience. So,
right.
well, thank you so much for sharing your story. That was awesome and inspirational for me, and I'm sure everyone else on social media that's going to watch this. So I can't wait to have another chat with you another time.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, thanks for reconnecting, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk sniff next time.
All right, we will on my podcast, Untold Physio Stories. And also, I'm sure I'll leave it in the show notes, but I am at Modern Manual Therapy on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So give me a like and heart my videos and subscribe, please.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for stopping by. Another plug, rocktherecovery.com.
All right. Yes, you got to work on that. You always got to do the outro, right?
That's right. All right. Have a good
All
rest of your
right.
day.
All right. We'll see you.